Welcome to episode 8 of the Movement Logic podcast. I'm Laurel Beversdorf, and I'm here with a very, very special guest, Trina Altman. Many listeners to this podcast are probably familiar with Trina's work. Trina is a yoga and Pilates teacher, a teacher's teacher in every respect. She is the creator of Yoga Deconstructed continuing education workshops and programming, and she authored a book called Yoga Deconstructed: Movement Science Principles for Teaching. Trina is also a co-creator and founding collaborator of Movement Logic tutorials. So together, Trina, Sarah Court, our podcast co-host extraordinaire, and I created the pelvic floor tutorial. And our very, very first baby tutorial was the low back pain tutorial. We were just getting started. Trina is also a longtime dear friend of mine. I talk to Trina sometimes for hours on the phone, and we have spent a lot of time together in a car lost in LA. And actually, today's interview, remember that day?
Oh, yeah.
Today's interview is inspired by our most recent phone conversation that I found absolutely eye-opening, inspiring, and really compelling. Do you remember that conversation, Trina?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah. So today we're talking about perimenopause. I wanted to read, because I'm big on sort of establishing a definition of terms, and I grabbed this right off the internet. So I want to read a definition of perimenopause so we're all kind of on the same page. Perimenopause is the transitional time around menopause. Menopause is when a woman's period stops, and it's marked by changes in the menstrual cycle, along with other physical and emotional symptoms. It can last for up to 2 to 10 years, apparently. So the thing since having that conversation with you, Trina, and I think we talked for close to 2 hours, and it was really just intended to be a catch up, but part of the catching up was this topic that came up, right? And it brought up a lot of memories of my mother when she was going through this transition in her life, and so many questions. So you inspired me to learn, as you always do, Trina, so much more on a topic that I really didn't realize I knew almost nothing about. So the thing I have been sitting with, this question I've been sitting with since talking to you, is I just wonder why with regards to perimenopause and menopause, if it affects 50% of the population, why aren't more people talking about it? Why am I not hearing about it? And why is it's seemingly so taboo, I guess? It seems like people don't feel comfortable talking openly about it. And I feel that people are much more comfortable talking about, say, puberty, right? And when girls do get their period and those changes that take place during that time. I think we've gotten past some of the taboo around that, but we seem to be still very much stuck in this idea that perimenopause, menopause is just something, you know what, we'd rather not talk about. And it's not just men, it's women as well, I feel. And it's a total mystery to me. And I don't think that it should be taboo. And I do think that we should be talking much more about it in the open. So anyway, I think we should just dive into some questions. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Trina, tell us about your experience with perimenopause and what it's been like for you.
Sure. So being the total nerd that I am, I always prepare. And so I have some notes. And before I forget, like right at the outset, I'm going to just say a few things just to put it on the table. Yes, I am known as the author of that, article about scope of practice from maybe 3 or 4 years ago in Yoga International. Like I have very firm beliefs about scope of practice. So here's what I want to say before I dive into my personal experience on this topic. I am not a medical provider, and this is in no way intended to be medical advice, nor am I advocating for or against any type of medical treatment. My experience is unique to me, as yours will be unique to you. And so if you have questions about this topic, you should definitely consult with your doctor for treatment options. And there's going to be links in the show notes for resources that I use to find healthcare providers who are knowledgeable about menopause, because that can be a roadblock. And then this is where I would recommend starting if you need help on this topic. So there's what's called the North American Menopause Society doctors, and that's a group of OBGYNs and other types of doctors that have been, gone through this training and are essentially up to date with the latest research on this topic, as opposed to maybe other doctors who read the big Women's Health Initiative research in 2002, which was 20 years ago, and haven't learned anything since. And then the other stumbling block that I came across, so I went to the North American Menopause Society doctor portal to search for a doctor, an OBGYN, a NAMS OBGYN in LA. And believe it or not, I live in Los Angeles. It was difficult to find. And if I did find them, LA is LA. So it was like, okay, it's only 9 miles away, but it's going to take me an hour and a half each way to get there. Is there some other way? Because I'm going to be stressed out like that I can. So the next place I found, so if there's no doctors local to you, there's a website, and it is all telemedicine North American Menopause Society doctors. So it's basically all the NAMS doctors, online Zoom appointment.
I feel relieved.
Yes.
So relieved. Just, I want to share that with you that I now, in my own podcast, have all these resources.
Yeah. I mean, this is just everything. I mean, that's why we're teachers, right? And why we're, this is all the stuff I wish I had known. And, I'm very grateful that it's 2022 and there's an internet and I could find out this stuff on my own. But it's nice when people cull things together and curate so you don't have to go down any strange, crazy rabbit holes.
Exactly.
If you want, and so of course, the big thing, whenever you talk about, oh my gosh, I'm having all these symptoms and, maybe I should do hormone replacement therapy. The first thing anyone says to you is, you'll get breast cancer. And so there is a research article that we're going to link to in the show notes that talks all about hormone replacement therapy and the risk of breast cancer. There is a link to a book, and it's called Estrogen Matters. It's by Avram Blooming, I think is how you pronounce it, and Carol Tavris. I have not read this book. I listened to a podcast. I read the research article and I listened to the podcast interview of the author with Heather Hirsch, who is from Brigham and Women's, Harvard University, runs the menopause, clinic or, whatever the thing is.
Yep.
And then I read the book called Menopause Manifesto by Jen Gunter.
Okay.
The reason why I really want to talk about the podcast interview, and I will get into my personal experience with the author and Heather Hirsch, is a personal story. So I'm married to a doctor. My husband is a musculoskeletal radiologist, so he's an MD. And whenever anything goes wrong with me and my body, because he's a doctor and he knows all the worst possible things that can happen, he's always like, oh, you're fine. When I was doubled over in pain and I had appendicitis, he was like, I'm sure it's just IBS or, period cramps, you'll be fine, because doctors don't want to think that somebody that they love could have anything wrong with them. So they kind of go into denial. And so I'm telling you this because in the podcast interview with Heather Hirsch of Avram Blooming, the doctor.
He's a medical oncologist.
Yes, and he co-wrote the book with Carol Tavris, who's a PhD in, I think,
social psychology.
Yes, social psychology. And in the podcast, he talks a lot about the only writing I've ever done has been research. So she helped me write a book that people could actually understand and was interesting.
Yeah.
And so right at the outset of the interview, he talks about why the book even exists. And the book exists because he's an oncologist and he focuses on breast cancer. And so for years and years and years, he was working with women who had breast cancer and they would go through the chemotherapy and then they go on a medication, tamoxifen. I forget what it's called. I don't, yeah. Anyways, there's a medication that you go on. Our dear friend Sarah Court, right? Like this hits very close to home. I actually had a breast cancer scare last summer that was just, that's another story, but anyways. And so these women would come in because he gives them the medication that induces menopause as soon as you're done with the chemotherapy to prevent it from coming back. So if you have breast cancer and you're 30, you're in menopause. If you have breast cancer and you're, however old you are, like if you're not already in menopause and you get through the chemotherapy, you go on this medication and immediately you're in menopause.
Okay.
And so they're immediately in menopause, they're coming for their follow-up visits, and they are complaining to him of all the symptoms.
What are the symptoms they're complaining of?
Yes. So, brain fog, memory.
What's that like?
Yeah. Well, for somebody like me who, is like straight A student, kind of a little on the nerdy side, it's horrible because I've never experienced brain fog unless I've drank too much alcohol, right? Like it's just not something that has ever happened to me.
Do you not have the ability to remember things? Is that what it is? Or do you lose your train of thought? Like what happens when you have brain fog?
A little bit of both.
For you. I think it's different for everybody.
Yeah. So the biggest thing I noticed was like forgetting people's names. And I'm like the person that all my friends call and are like, remember that woman who was in our teacher training like 8 years ago? And and I'm like, oh yeah, so-and-so. Right?
You're a connector. You're a connector. I think of you as like a quintessential connector who knows people and connects people who could benefit from having a relationship together. Yeah.
Yes. So I was forgetting people's names, people's names that I should not be forgetting. And, it's interesting. I'm going to talk about this briefly. When I was at the height of all of my symptoms, it's traumatic, right? And whenever, at least for me, I experience something traumatic, it's all very vivid and clear. So it's good we have the conversation when we did, because I told you everything. Yeah. But now it's April, which is only like 3 months later or something. And I've kind of blocked out a lot of the really bad stuff, which is a healthy response to trauma and stress, because I'm in such a better place. Good. So the names, that was like the most, and then just like being in the middle of a sentence and forgetting what I was going to say. Like there was a little bit more to it, but I feel like those were the two main things. And then of course, hot flashes.
Okay. Tell us about those.
So the first one I ever had, I remember was in 2019 because it was Thanksgiving. And we went to Tulsa, Oklahoma to visit my parents. We were out for dinner one night. I think it was like, Thanksgiving was Thursday. So it was like Friday or Saturday night. And just, like all of a sudden just breaking out and dripping sweat. And it's November and it's cold outside,
Wow. And you are not a cold person.
I mean, my hands and feet, because of my low blood pressure.
Meaning you don't love the cold is what I
don't like the cold. Yeah. And I tend to be cold. So because of the hypermobility and the low blood pressure, I almost always have cold hands and feet. So it can be like summertime and I touch Farzad and he's like, get your hands off of me, they're freezing.
I remember when you stayed at my apartment in New York, I think it was early spring. So, in all fairness, it was kind of cold outside in New York. Yeah. And we always complained about it being so hot in our apartment. Right. And you were in the room that we had because we didn't have Eliana yet, so you were in the guest room, and you were so cold. I had to get you like 2 space heaters. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
I remember being near the window, which was great because the sun was streaming in, but I was like, it's freezing.
Yeah. Hot flashes.
So hot flashes, which was not a big deal until it was. So it started to become a big deal, I would say like end of last year. So, 19. So that was like 2 years later. They were more often. So I would just be like sitting on the couch watching Netflix with Farzad and I'd get a hot flash. So I'd like peel off all the layers, down to my tank top, and it was winter and I'd had like, long sleeve shirt, sweatshirt, and it would end, put the layers back on because I'm cold. Another hot flash, all the layers off. And then it started happening at night.
Yeah.
And then that's when I am a sleeper, which you know.
Yep.
I have always been able to like easily sleep 10 hours a night. 9 is like my go-to, but if I only get say 7 hours for a couple of nights, I will make it up and sleep 10, 11 hours. So I was waking up in the middle of the night with the hot flashes. And then, I've throughout my life suffered from anxiety and depression, but all through my 20s. So it's interesting because this period of time in my life I'll be 50 in May, has kind of taken me back to my 20s because that was when I was, really struggling with life after school, essentially. Like, how do you be a working person when you're really good at school and you like school and you don't want school to end?
Right. So it reminded you, these symptoms and the suffering that you were having from these symptoms reminded you of that type of suffering, of kind of starting over?
Well,
or starting something very
having the
foreign and new?
hormonal changes, so while in my 20s, it was more of, like, how am I going to survive in New York City? How am I going to get through every day of a job that I hate that doesn't challenge my brain in any way whatsoever?
Right.
Kind of being in relationships that weren't really, I knew were not going to be long term, and just having anxiety and depression that affected my ability to function on a day-to-day basis.
Yep.
And then having symptoms again that, the brain fog and the memory loss, I was like, I remember telling you this, that I was talking to my friend Nikki, and I was like, do people ever retire at 50? Because like, I think I'm done, and it was because I was just feeling like I couldn't remember things. Like, there are things I need to remember in order to do the work that I do. Right. So it kind of took me, and then being a guinea pig of like, okay, I have to navigate the medical system. This was when SSRIs first came out.
What are those?
Oh, SSRIs are serotonin reuptake inhibitors. There's 2 S's. But anyways, before the 90s, basically you didn't want to tell anyone you had anxiety or depression because there was really nothing to do for you other than like shock treatment or, like stick your head in the oven like Sylvia Plath, which I'm laughing, but it's true. Right. It is just kind of like one of those things that you just kind of, you didn't talk about, and you didn't, there was nothing they could do. And
kind of sounds like perimenopause and menopause.
Exactly. Yes. And so, Prozac came out on the market. Elizabeth Wurtzel's book, Prozac Nation came out. The movie Girl Interrupted with Angelina Jolie came out. And then, there was Paxil, there was Zoloft, there were all these different medications that, in conjunction with psychotherapy, you would figure out. But I was like, they put me on every single different one until finally, like 8 years later, we realized I just needed 20 milligrams, 1 pill a day of Prozac, and I was good. Right. But like that was after being on lithium and Paxil and Zoloft and Wellbutrin and Ritalin and Ativan, and so I was like, oh shit, am I going to be going through this again?
I see.
Of being a guinea pig, navigating the medical system, and having to figure out what is going to work.
Because no one is really telling you clearly what is happening to you and what to do about it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, because that's where we are right now. It seems like that's kind of where we are. We're the equivalent of the 90s and mental health at this point. They're not the same thing. They're not. I'm not meaning to paint an equivalency here, but
no,
it does feel like we're all kind of out to sea, and no one's really talking about it for that reason. And also, people I think are afraid to share what it is they're doing because it hasn't been, maybe substantiated or something, or we'll talk about hormone replacement therapy a little bit, estrogen replacement therapy a little bit, but it seems like there are a lot of conflicting messages about all of this. So, all right, well, is there anything that you feel like you haven't shared about your experience with menopause and what you've learned about it along the way? Because I wanted to ask you your next question, which is really related to the first question. So you can always chime in with those things that we didn't talk about yet. But if there's anything that you feel like you wanted to say.
I mean, I think it just, as somebody who, you know, kind of figured out in my 20s what I needed to be, like, you know, obviously you always have your ups and downs, but like, you know, if I went to therapy, you know, once a week, you know, talk therapy, and I took the Prozac, you know, pill one time a day, I was pretty good, you know, like I was never somebody who had like horrible period cramps, or, you know, I was on birth control pill when I went to college. I remember, you know, my mom was like, we're going to the OBGYN, and right, like, here's the birth control pills, don't get pregnant, you know.
Right.
And being on them and always having like sore, tender breasts.
Yeah.
And then eventually being like, you know what, like I can tell this is not like good. I'm going to go off of them, you know, use condoms and a diaphragm, which is not ideal, but I felt so much better when I was not on the birth control pills anymore.
Yeah.
And so again, that's another reason why it kind of took me back to this place, because it felt like, how do you explain it? You know, like as a woman, right, it's my responsibility to not get pregnant, right?
Right.
Like, so I'm the one that has to take the pill or do the thing. So, because I knew I never wanted to have children. So my goal was like, just don't get pregnant until you're in menopause.
Right.
Which is, you know, and I succeeded. But, you know, and then that's
when you can't get pregnant anymore.
Well, I mean, actually, I have my period right now, so I'm not quite there yet. But I'm close. And so, yeah, it was just, you know, I guess as a feminist, and then, you know, my age. So when I was growing up, where I lived, there were no female gynecologists, right? They're really like, women weren't going to medical school and had like graduated and were working as OBGYNs in the 70s and 80s in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Definitely in the 90s, yes. So it just, you know, had that sort of, and I knew like about the OBGYN, like the kid that I went to school with, whose dad was the, you know, OBGYN, who, you know, like cheated on his wife with all of his patients.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, but that's just like, you know, that's like normal stuff back then. I mean, probably, anyways, you know. And so I guess, you know, I do also remember my mom having a book on her nightstand, and it was by Gail Sheehy, and I think it's called The Silent Passage. So it was like the only book on menopause at the time.
Oh.
Which, yes, yeah. And so going back to what you were saying about mental health in the 90s, you know, there was no internet then, there was no social media. There was Elizabeth Wurtzel's book. But now actually we are definitely like not in the same place, in the sense that there are all these like, you know, Ivy League educated OBGYN women who are like hardcore feminists, you know, like writing books, sifting through all the research. You can go and watch every single YouTube video on Heather Hirsch's, you know, channel, listen to all the podcasts. You know, like the information is there. It's the opposite. It's, do you have, you know, I always talk about like people say, well, you know, I'm sure you can relate to this. Like my undergrad was worthless. It was, you know, liberal arts education, but it wasn't. Like my undergrad education was an education. Like the whole thing was like, okay, Trina, here's this political science theory. Here's all the books written by this political scientist and what they say and their research to back it up. And here's the opposing views and their research. Now you need to write a paper talking about what you think is right with research to back it up. And so, you know, experiences like that, not experiences of like, here's the information that's going to be on your test, memorize it, regurgitate it, and get all these multiple choice questions correct. I was like, no, you got to not only write a 20-page paper, you also, like every test is an essay question, or you have to do a presentation. And so coming to this hurdle at this time in my life, while it was somewhat stressful, I was like, I can do this. Like, got the
Mm-hmm.
internet. I'm very discerning about who I will listen to and won't listen to, and then
Yeah.
finding people that I will listen to and finding people that are saying the opposite so that I know that I'm not, you know. Um, but I know that that's not everyone's cup of tea. That's
Well,
not what everyone wants to be doing.
this is making me think of my own past, and then also just a question I have for you about your experience looking for resources, doctors in LA. So I was raised in a very religious household where the approach to female reproductive rights was abstinence only. And so when I was coming of age, it was all on me and it had to all be undertaken in secret until I was on my own in college, where I could freely go to the campus clinic and get the things that I needed and get the advice that I needed. And so when I embark on a topic like perimenopause and menopause, which has to do with women's reproductive bodies and life, it brings up a whole bunch of feelings around that are ones where in the beginning of my life I largely wasn't allowed to really talk about or really become curious about, because it was sort of like that's off limits, right? We're going to talk about that to the extent to which the conversation ends in abstinence only. And so of course I revolted against that and did a 180 when I went to college and became what I would also call a liberal feminist. But so your experience is really interesting for me to hear. On the other hand, something that's very, very interesting to me about my past and that I'm starting to recognize is that my mother was super open about her perimenopausal experience and her menopausal experiences, like very open. She would talk openly about them in front of my brothers, my father, me. I think my parents were divorced when she started to get hit with the symptoms pretty hard. But I was privy to a lot of information around what was happening and changing in her body and the things that she was trying to do about it. She was taking black cohosh, she was taking like the herbs, she was drinking ice water, she was, just trying to manage. And she was working. She was an English teacher, a high school English teacher. So it's just the dichotomy there is very interesting to me, that like we weren't really allowed to talk about my reproductive life when I was young and coming of age and hitting puberty and interested in dating and things like that. But we talked all about her transition, which I'm grateful for. Don't get me wrong. I'm really glad that she
Yeah.
shared so much
Yeah.
with it about me. And I think that I, am a little bit more open and curious about this transition as a result. So the question that I have for you is like, having been somebody who was really given like no resources, and there was a lot of secrecy and shame, I'll just say, around like pursuing my own reproductive health and rights as a young woman. For you in LA, what I remember talking about with you on the phone was that you actually had a hard time finding doctors who would answer the types of questions that you had, or had the knowledge to answer the types of questions that you had, or would entertain certain treatment approaches that you were interested in learning more about. If you want to talk about hormone replacement therapy, we can talk about that. And then thinking about how you're in LA and I'm in Alabama. So now I'm thinking, well, if Trina had a hard time finding somebody in LA, how's it going to be for me in Alabama? And then all of these worries about like going into my OBGYN's office and asking her, because I have an appointment in like a month, can you talk to me about hormone replacement therapy, estrogen replacement therapy? I'm 41. I'm thinking about perimenopause. I'm not experiencing symptoms yet, but I want to be prepared. And for her to say something like, we don't do that here. We don't talk about that here. It's like all that like past, developmental stuff might come back rearing its ugly head, and just that feeling of not having support, I guess, is really what I'm trying to hint at here. What was it like for you, I guess, in LA, struggling to find somebody, an authority, and an expert and a doctor, right, who could help you And then I think I remember you telling me that it was actually not that easy in LA, Los Angeles, like big
Yeah.
city.
So I did not have an experience of going to my OBGYN and, you know, trying to get information about HRT or perimenopause or menopause and having difficulty. That was actually
Okay,
not what happened at all.
good.
Yeah, no, all of the symptoms that I had were just, like I would have hot flashes every once in a while, or I would notice that, like I was eating a lot less and exercising a lot more,
Mm,
and I still weighed the most that I've ever weighed in my entire life.
mm.
Yeah, and so, but I was like, well, it is what it is. But it was when the brain fog, the memory loss, the mood swings, and the hot flashes that were keeping me up all night basically interfered with, that's when I was like, I think I need to just retire and stay home because like I can't really function, I can't sleep. I'm like super angry and mood swings. So I actually knew at that point, based on the research I had done, that I only wanted to go to a doctor that was specialized and knew the current research on menopause.
Okay.
So I was like, I will not go to my regular OBGYN
Oh, okay. You didn't
because
even
he
try.
is not, no, I only, and this I'm very grateful to my mother. My brother was born with a congenital heart defect, so he had a hole in his heart. And at that period of time, there was nothing to do for it. And then my mom did all the research. We would travel, from Tulsa, Oklahoma to Houston, Texas Children's Hospital every summer, because that's where the best pediatric cardiologists were for him to have his checkups. Then they finally invented the surgery that would, fix the problem. The surgeon who invented it was the only person that my mom would let my brother go to. His name, very famous, Denton Cooley. We waited till his heart was big enough, and Denton Cooley did his, and now it's like an outpatient
Oh, wow.
procedure in a clinic.
Right.
But for him, it was 3 open heart surgeries and he almost died. It was only supposed to be 1 open heart surgery.
Oh my
And
gosh.
then he just had one recently where, because it was so archaic and new, when he had it, there was just like crazy scar tissue they had to clean up a couple years ago. Anyways, so I grew up in the opposite situation. I grew up Jewish, which typically Jewish culture is you get lots of second opinions. You find the absolute best doctor out there. Right? And then not only do you find the best doctor, you find multiple best doctors,
I see.
and you use your critical thinking skills to compare and contrast what each one is saying, because there isn't really like, as we know, you might come to me for strength training or Pilates or yoga, and I have lots of knowledge and I'm a great teacher, but so are you, and so is Sarah, and we might give different exercises to the
Right.
same person, right? Because that's
So when you were doing your research, I'm curious about how you went about figuring out, is it this organization that you mentioned at the top of the
yes.
show that you actually just went and looked
I
at
went
their
straight
roster
to
of
their
doctors?
roster.
Got it.
And they didn't even have a search portal then, so I literally was like searching every single
Ah,
place in California.
okay.
And I found somebody in Palos Verdes who her website is the Menopause Lady,
Okay.
and I think
Yes, this is
yes,
what I remember from our
yes,
conversation.
yes.
Okay.
And it was out of pocket, but you could, I think, submit it, for reimbursement, like as
Hmm.
out of network. But she sent me a questionnaire form. It was like 6 pages long with
Okay.
all the questions about everything,
Hmm.
super thorough. Spends the whole hour talking with you, listening to you, educating you, answering your questions. So that's where I went first. But her degree, she's not an MD. She's
Okay.
a NP, which is a nurse practitioner, and then
Okay.
she's also, I think, like um, a, a social worker with like a counseling degree. So
Okay.
I was like, okay, good. I've got this cornered. Like she is, because MDs are notorious for literally like spending no more than 10 minutes with you.
Right.
Right. And so I'm like, I'll get a full hour with her. But Farzad, who is a doctor, was like, great, but whatever she does, promise me you will also, being married to a doctor is the second opinion thing, on top of the Jewish thing, you will also go to a NAMS doctor that's an OBGYN.
And the NAMS doctor is the National Association of Menopause.
Yes.
That's the one you mentioned at the top of the show, right?
North American Society
Okay.
Menopause. Yeah, doctor.
All right. So you found an MD and this.
The MD that I found, though, was in Beverly Hills. I called and I asked how much it was, and they said, it depends. I said, how much is a consultation? They said, it depends. And I was like, and I hate Beverly Hills. It like totally traumatizes me to drive there and park there and be there. And also I saw like a lot of woo-woo stuff that she was also selling that I was just like, I don't
Critical thinking skills.
Yes, exactly. And she could be fantastic at earning a living and making a lot of money, and be a great doctor. Anyways, those were red flags for me. So that's when I found Genev, which is spelled G as in girl, E as in elephant, N as in Nancy, N as in Nancy, E as in elephant, V as in victory. And there's actually, I just listened to another Heather Hirsch podcast, and I think there's another company now called Alloy. So anyways, these are telemedicine practices that are only OBGYNs that are North American Menopause Society certified.
Right.
So then I did a telehealth appointment with an OBGYN through Genev, who actually went to UCLA, like grew up in the next town over in Hermosa Beach, lives in outside of Seattle, and it was, I think, $80 for 30 minutes or like $120 for an hour. You can submit it for insurance, but it's not. And so then I had, and then I finally went to a third OBGYN who is not North American Menopause Society, that's local to me, after going to the two, the one in Palos Verdes, the menopause lady, the one on Genev, the telemed, and then just the regular OBGYN that's not NAMS, and told her kind of like what information I got from the first person, what information I got from the second person, and asking her thoughts.
This sounds like you made this your job for
Yes.
a while, and that you really went aggressively at getting answers to your questions and not fact checking, but at least checking for consistency in terms of what people were telling you. Do you think that you're a regular lady living in the United States? Like, do you think that this is most women's experience when they start to experience the symptoms of perimenopause and they go to their doctor, it's their OBGYN, and maybe it's, some small town or mid-sized city in the United States. I guess we're just, we're speculating here, but I think I know kind of generally what I think might kind of go on there, and I have lots of students that are experiencing perimenopause and menopause, and they talk to me about how kind of hopeless they feel and they don't know what to do about it, and the symptoms are pretty debilitating. They're suffering considerably from them, and they're not really getting the help that they need. What can you say about like how your experience might kind of match up to other people's, if you're also familiar with other people who have shared their experience with perimenopause?
I have this personality of where, like, if there is a problem, I'm gonna figure that out. I don't know if we're explicit or not explicit yet on this podcast, so I'm not gonna curse.
Oh, you can swear.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I'm very determined, and I don't trust people. So even if somebody like is saying like, oh yeah, like the Women's Health Initiative information has been debunked, and it's fine to take HRT, but you should only do bioidentical hormones. And I learned that bioidentical hormones are not FDA approved. I'm like, F that, right? Like, right. I'm going to listen. Yes. Okay.
Pause for just a second. Yes. So the Women's Health Initiative came out with what may be, and this is being called into question through the book Estrogen Matters, which I am currently listening to on audiobook, that the Women's Health Initiative came out with sort of these proclamations, so to speak, that basically scared people into stopping hormone replacement therapy / estrogen replacement therapy because it caused breast cancer. Estrogen Matters is a book written by these two individuals that we named at the top of the show, Dr. Avram Blooming and Dr. Carol Tavris, that basically dismantles those claims made by the Women's Health Initiative and actually puts forth many pretty convincing evidence-based arguments for why estrogen replacement therapy and hormone replacement therapy is potentially, life-saving for many reasons, and the way that it protects women's hearts, brains, and bones were the big topics of discussion: cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease, and fractures, life-ending fractures from osteoporosis. How estrogen replacement therapy can stave off those degenerative diseases and actually increase a woman's life by several years. How the risks of cardiovascular disease vastly outweigh the risks of breast cancer in terms of mortality, death, and also, and then when you get into like the life-ending effects of bone fractures, that the benefits of, it seems as though the argument they're putting forth, which seems very convincing. I'm also a very skeptical person, and I don't trust even really smart sounding people on an audiobook called Estrogen Matters with PhD after they or MD after them. But I have to say that a lot of what I'm hearing in this book is shocking, frankly, shocking. And anyway, I just wanted to jump in there and say, what is the Women's Health Initiative? Where's this controversy kind of coming from around estrogen replacement therapy, hormone replacement therapy? I feel like this might be kind of the edge of a really maybe exciting movement in women's health. This idea that we should maybe start taking estrogen from the time we start to experience perimenopausal symptoms for the rest of our life is the argument that I'm hearing.
Depending on who you are and
depending. This is all from the book.
Individual circumstances are.
Yes. No, this is not my advice.
Yeah.
This is what's being put forth in this book, though, which I'm finding very convincing, but I, again, am very skeptical as well.
Yeah. And I think it's sort of like, so in terms of storytelling, Avram Blooming is an oncologist who specializes in breast cancer. And so he would help all these women not die of breast cancer because they would get chemotherapy. And then they would come into his office. This is a story that he told on the Heather Hirsch podcast when she interviewed him. And they would say, I have brain fog, I have memory loss, I have mood swings, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have weight gain, I have, I'm not sleeping because of the hot flashes. Basically, like, I can't function and my life is awful. What can you do to help me? And he would say, aren't you just glad you're alive and you didn't die of breast cancer? Right. And then here's what happened. His wife got breast cancer. And she went on the medication after the chemotherapy that put her into menopause. And she had all of these symptoms. And he actually lives with her because she's his wife. Right. And he talks about how she is extremely smart and that her favorite thing to do is read books. And she would be reading a book and could not remember what she had read 2 pages prior. And he said that he thought to himself, I wonder how good this research really is. And then this is an interesting personal anecdote, but many of you know Jules Mitchell, and she went to Arizona State University, and she actually interned at the Women's Health Initiative because she majored in, I believe it was engineering and women's studies, so it was part of her women's studies, and they wanted to hire her after she graduated, but she said the pay was going to be, I think, $8 an hour, so she was like, no, sorry, I can't do that. But anyways, she's an expert on, teaching yoga teachers how to read and interpret research. Yeah. And, she said even then she was so skeptical of how they were doing the research and what they were concluding based on who they were doing the research on. So most of the research was done, I think, on women over 65. Yes. And, what they're saying.
And a lot of statistically insignificant findings were put forth in a way that made it seem like they were significant.
Yes. And so I think, as with my story of my husband who, never wants anything to be wrong with me because he's a doctor, right? And as a feminist, it's interesting that, a male breast cancer surgeon, oncologist, doctor, is not, he finally couldn't sleep at night anymore because he had told so many women, suck it up, cupcake, right?
Suck it up, cupcake.
Be glad you're not dead of breast cancer. There's nothing I can do for any of these symptoms, until his wife had the symptoms.
Right. And I will also say this suck it up cupcake is something women are very, very familiar with hearing in many stages of their reproductive lives, including period cramps, labor,
Yes.
prenatal, labor, postnatal issues, pelvic floor traumas after giving birth, pelvic floor pain, pelvic pain, and now perimenopause and menopause. And so kind of just to go back a little bit, I don't want to be that woman that walks into that office and hears that type of treatment from my medical care providers. But I also want to be that woman like you who does, extensive evidence-based reviews and research of the people who will be giving me advice, so that it's not just I want to have 30 minutes with my doctor. It's actually I want to have a doctor that listens to me and is current on the evidence and then gives me advice that will actually help me and doesn't say, suck it up, buttercup. You're a woman. That's just the way it is.
Right. And luckily we don't have to anymore, because there are there are female doctors of all specialties, but for a very long time there weren't. Yeah. But I think for me, because I didn't experience the last time I, had issues like dealing with birth control and it affecting my hormones in my 20s, or getting my period and having period cramps, when you're 13 and all that. This kind of hit me hard, because I've been kind of smooth sailing for a very long time, because I skipped the whole, pregnancy, postnatal, prenatal, like that whole phase, which may be why I had so much energy for this phase to research it. I don't know.
Right.
But,
yeah. The thing about I think kind of the umbrella issue that we might be talking about in this conversation is about women's rights, feminism, the patriarchy, of course, right? It's kind of all sitting there in the room with us, these characters, right? And these create sometimes invisible barriers. They create invisible obstacles that we're actually always battling, but we might not realize that we're battling. And so we start to wonder, what's wrong with me? Like, why can't I just suck it up, buttercup? Why can't I get it together? And so I find that even if, listeners maybe aren't going through the symptoms of perimenopause, maybe male listeners who never will, that maybe what we're also, listening for in this conversation is about those inequalities and those invisible obstacles that different populations, not just women, face in a society. So fascinating. Can I ask you another question that's related to the ones before it?
Yeah.
Because this is a podcast for movement teachers spanning yoga, Pilates, strength, also physical therapists. Can you speak to how the symptoms of perimenopause affected you physically in terms of your physical activity? You are an extremely active person. You are big into strength training, which I find very inspiring when I see your posts on Instagram and talk to you about strength training. We geek out about it. How did perimenopause affect your energy levels in the different types of activities, modalities that you practice as a practitioner? And then you can also speak to teaching as a very physical job as well, if you want to speak to that as well.
Yeah, I think it's been a really interesting time for me because of the pandemic. I guess, let's see, I'll be 50 in May. And so in March of 2020, I was 47. And I think average age of menopause is 51, but it can be, some people 55. So I had the unique privilege of having a lot of extra time to be outside, number one, and like go on walks. I used to never have time to go on walks because I was driving everywhere, but also to exercise because I wasn't commuting and I wasn't driving and I wasn't looking for parking and I wasn't traveling. And so I think it was a gift in many ways because I really only had time to. Before the pandemic, I would do one like strength, high intensity interval training class a week on Tuesdays and one weightlifting session with my personal trainer. So it's kind of like 1.5-ish weightlifting. And then when the pandemic came, I was doing twice a week weightlifting, but also like I was home and I'd do some pull-ups every time I walked through the doorway with the pull-up bar, like there was just, and then eventually like built out my whole garage. So, into a gym. And I would say that what was really interesting is, as I said, I was exercising more. I was eating a lot healthier because I wasn't eating out anymore. I was eating at home. Right. So while I ate healthy when I would eat out, like say you go and you get, like we have tender greens or whatever, and you get, like the chicken or the salmon and it comes with like vegetables and rice or, mashed potatoes and a salad. But like the protein is kind of small and the carbs are pretty big and the vegetables are a little, so like at home, you're like, oh, I can have all the vegetables I want. And that's not like, I can put however much oil on it I want. I don't have to like coat it in oil like they do at the restaurant.
Right.
And the scale just kept going up and up and up. And so I had to learn actually a lot about nutrition. I was one of those people, I know you as well, where it just, I ate,
Yeah.
eat and eat and eat. And when I'd see people eat small portions, I was like, what's wrong with them? Why are they doing that? And then even as a kid, like I was the kid that would like eat the funnel cake and then go on the roller coaster. I was the kid that like, when, I got my tonsils out, my mom's like, where do you want to go eat? And I'm like, Taco Bueno. I want to get the Bueno Chilada with jalapeno, like after my, So I guess going back to your question, yes, like people who, are like me, genetically privileged with whatever skinny genes or like good, digestion, that changed as well. I kind of suffered from IBS off and on throughout my life, but yeah. And so I guess as a teacher, just being aware that your students, don't give your students medical advice, but you can, if they come up to you and talk about perimenopausal symptoms, like suggest resources like the North American Menopause Society doctor website, suggest going to the Genev website and doing a 30-minute consult with a OBGYN on Zoom. Maybe, recommend a couple books or podcasts that you think might be helpful and just tell them that they should really go to a doctor or 2 or 3 to, get some information.
Yeah. And would you say there are any relevant questions that a movement teacher could ask, say, if you were the student or client of a movement teacher? Are there any scope appropriate relevant questions that a movement teacher might ask if your client has offered up this information that they're going through perimenopause or experiencing those symptoms? What would be in scope, session relevant, movement relevant, programming relevant questions that you might ask your student? Can you think of any?
Well, I'm like 2 things are coming to mind. The first thing is I'm a big proponent of don't really like figure your stuff out first. So if you are also perimenopausal, right? I this is something that kind of irritates me, but I find that a lot of movement teachers like to give advice on topics that are issues they have themselves that they haven't dealt with, right? Like, so they're like, oh, you have Achilles tendonitis? So do I. But they still haven't gone to the physical therapist themselves to deal with their own Achilles tendonitis. And they're like looking at YouTube videos and recommending this thing and that thing that they've done, but they haven't actually gone to a professional.
Right.
Right? And so same thing with this. It's like, sure, share your personal experience. I'm sharing mine, but, and you can say what has worked for you because that is your personal experience. But, yeah, I guess I feel like so many issues are brought up, to us as movement teachers that should really be issues that are brought up. Like the same thing happens with pelvic floor stuff, right? So like, I'll get a teacher who will ask me, a bunch of my students are asking me about pelvic floor stuff. I want to take a pelvic floor training so I can help them better. And I'm like, why don't you first go to a pelvic floor physical therapist yourself, and maybe even if you don't need to, like at least just interview them and say, I have a lot of students that need this.
Right. Tell me about how you might be able to help them.
Send your students to the person who has their doctorate in physical therapy that then did like an extra 2-year fellowship training program instead of just all of this random like searching the internet and guessing. That's fine, but that should be on top of and in addition to going to a clinician or a doctor.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say about that though is that in a country like the United States, where many people don't have access to affordable health care, where seeking affordable health care and receiving it can be a financial hardship, that can sometimes feel like non-advice.
Right, absolutely.
And I'm not asking about what advice should you give. I'm asking what questions should you give or ask. I was thinking along the lines of, how are your energy levels? Would that be a relevant question to somebody experiencing symptoms of perimenopause? What would feel good right now? What are your goals right now? What do you want to work on? I have, for example, I have students who do share with me that they're, they want, one student wants wants to be active. They want to stay active every day. And what helps them stay active every day is being given a program, basically being given a list of classes to take. And they can then pick and choose based on like a couple of different options that I give them, which one sounds better for them on a given day. And other students might, for example, want to work on their strength. I have another private student that I'm working with who really has decided now in this stage that her goal is, whereas before it was that she wanted to do mostly, body weight, Pilates type work. She's recognizing she wants something a little bit more strength training oriented. And so I just wonder if you would know of any other particularly relevant questions that would keep a teacher actually in scope, that only deal with how that teacher actually provides a service for their student within the scope of practice of that teacher.
So now I understand. So I've been teaching private sessions since 2007, and that's always been the bulk of my business. So I have been asking these questions at the beginning of every session for 15 years, whether the person has, whatever, they always have something because that's why they're doing private sessions. Or they don't and they just want to learn. And so I think that is the beauty of a private session. Because it is completely catered to the individual. So I think that should just be no matter what. Like at the beginning of every session, I check in with my client. How are you doing? How are you feeling? What do you want to focus on today? I have a plan. Like I have your whole program typed up in the spreadsheet on the Google Doc, but we can completely scrap it if something's going on that I don't know about, that I need to change everything. And so I think that should just be a given no matter what. And then,
Also maybe to not be surprised when a student wants to tell you that they're having perimenopausal symptoms, right? And to not be taken back by that, and maybe to learn a little bit, and this includes our male teachers out there, learn a little bit about what perimenopause is, what it can entail. It's different for everybody, as you said at the very top of the show. I've heard of women who have had no symptoms. in any stage of perimenopause and menopause at
And
all.
they don't even know it. And then suddenly they're
Yeah.
like, wow, I haven't had my period for a year. I guess I'm in menopause. I'm like,
Exactly.
I'm so happy for you.
So then also maybe something to note is that if someone says that they are experiencing perimenopause or menopause, don't assume that they're having any symptoms at all, right? You just take the lead of the student and check in, which is common practice, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the symptoms of things that happen in perimenopause happen not because of perimenopause. So say you're having mood swings and trouble sleeping. Well, I have students of all genders, of all ages, who have mood swings, anxiety, depression, and difficulty sleeping. And so a lot of these symptoms that happen in perimenopause, I have a lot of clients that have brain fog and memory loss, and they're not in perimenopause, right? It's for other reasons they have brain fog and memory loss. And so, just really thinking about, I think as movement educators, we tend to really be like, oh, well, if you have this condition, I should know these protocols and ask these questions. And instead, just like everything is biopsychosocial, like your male clients might have brain fog and memory loss, right?
Exactly.
Or mood swings. And so, not to overly worry about educating yourself on every possible condition, because we are so lucky that we actually don't have to do what the doctors do, which is like spend 12 years of their lives going to school specializing in one little teeny tiny thing and then only being able to know about that and treat that.
On the other hand, I will say that for me, at least, my inroad to being able to empathize and have compassion for others is to try to understand what it is that they might be experiencing, and whether that takes place on an interpersonal level, an intellectual level, an academic level. I do think that knowledge is compassion making. It can be, at least. It can also be the opposite.
Well, and I think, the way you learn is by being a recipient of the kind of treatment you want to receive. Yeah. So if you go and you take private sessions with somebody who's really good at what they do, you're going to see, how much knowledge they have about you and your specific conditions. Like I have a new client who has joint hypermobility EDS. So of course I already know a ton about it, but I just bought like the brand new latest book, that's 300 pages about it, because it's like, cool, I can help her even more.
Exactly.
So, make your pursuit of knowledge specific and practical to the people that need you the most.
Exactly. Wow, this has been a really fascinating conversation that I feel like I learned so much having with you, Trina. So thank you so much. I wanted to ask you two more questions. One, related or unrelated to our topic, what are you really excited about right now in your teaching / personal life? Anything you want to talk about? What's like really getting you excited?
Teaching my private clients. So this is the first time in my life that we've owned a house. So we bought a house at the beginning of the pandemic, and as far as my husband's very kind. He let me turn we have 3 bedrooms, 1 bedroom into a room that's just for yoga, somatics, and filming, another bedroom into a room that has the Pilates reformer and the rebounder, and then we turned our garage into a gym. And so when my clients come over, I can say, what do you want to do today? Do you want to lift weights? Do you want to do some somatics? Do you want to get on the reformer? Do you want to do some cardio on the tramp? Do you want to do a little bit of each? And it has, after surviving the pandemic online, it just makes me so happy.
Yes, you're seeing people in person.
Seeing people in person, not having to rent space at the studio, not having to drive in traffic and park, and literally just having them show up and welcome them into my house, and then teaching my in-person classes.
Wow. That is next level. That is next level. That they come to you.
They come to me, and if I want to go overtime with them, I can, because I don't have to pay extra, or I don't have a client waiting for me at the top of hour. I book buffers in between each client.
Game changer.
It's such a, yes.
That's cool. But it's a particular type of person, I think, that would really love to have people come into their house.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm thinking about that for myself, and I'm like, I'd have to think about that a little bit more.
Well, I mean, I don't have children, and Fausa does
Yes,
work at the hospital. So I'm
right.
the only person at home, and I only teach my privates during the day, during the week. I don't teach nights. I don't teach weekends.
Wonderful.
So no one's here except for us. Yeah.
Seems like it is a perfect fit.
It is.
For you and for your space and your circumstances.
Yes,
That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
And Trina, where can people find you, learn from you? What are all the ways?
Yeah, best way to stay in touch and to learn about what I'm offering is to join my email list. So I regularly send out free content, teaching resources through it. You can sign up for my email list on my website, which is trinaaltman.com. And then we'll put a link in the show notes where when you sign up, you get a free somatic sequence that you can use in your, 2 sequences actually, that you can use in your personal practice and teaching.
Fantastic. Well, Trina, thanks so much for being here with me to talk about your personal experience with perimenopause. I think that the resources that you've provided, the anecdotes that you've shared, the wisdom that you always lead with will be so helpful to our listeners. So thank you for sharing so generously, as you always do. And I am so grateful to you for being here with me.
Thank you. Thank you for, providing this forum, because yes, all the research that I did, I really want to share it so that I can help other people so they don't have to slog through as much stuff.
I know you will, and I am grateful, and I am following you and listening to everything you're saying because I'm right behind you.